Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most audacious intellectual crimes of the 20th century, the story of how a philosopher's mind was hijacked and his ideas twisted into a weapon for an ideology he absolutely hated. So, how does a guy who hated nationalism and antisemitism end up as a poster boy for the Nazi regime? Well, the answer isn't just, a simple mix-up. We're talking about forgery, about family betrayal, and about the deliberate twisting of philosophy into a weapon. All right, so to really get how this all went down, we have to start with the weapon itself. And it's a weird one. It's this twisted political version of nihilism that became, believe it or not, the perfect glue for extremist movements. Now, this isn't the kind of deep philosophical nihilism you'd debate in a classroom. Nope. This is a political tool, plain and simple. It's this warped idea that basically lets you justify anything. Extreme violence, aggression, tossing out all morality, as long as it's for political gain. It's how you get movements full of contradictions to stick together. It's how the Nazis, for instance, could actually celebrate a sadistic war criminal like the SS commander Oskar Dirlewanger. It just papers over the psychopathy. And this is where you can really see that chaos in action. I mean, think about it. How can an ultra-Catholic and an atheist socialist start the same political party? It makes no sense. Or how can a movement push for regional separatism and hyper-nationalism at the very same time? Well, with weaponized nihilism, it just doesn't matter. The contradictions are irrelevant because the only thing that's real is the goal: power. Everything else? Totally disposable. Okay, so if that was the weapon, who was the victim? Let's meet the real Friedrich Nietzsche, the man whose entire legacy was stolen for a cause he absolutely would have despised. Yeah, the real Nietzsche was pretty much the polar opposite of the Nazi myth. He was all about the individual, not the herd. He openly mocked German nationalism, calling it small-minded. And he was a fierce, fierce critic of the antisemitism that was bubbling up in his day. Honestly, he would have been their #1 enemy. And look, this wasn't some abstract idea hidden in his books. His life was a direct contradiction to the hatred he got pinned with. I mean, his closest friend was a Jewish philosopher, Paul Rée, the guy who made him famous across Europe, a Jewish critic, George Brandes. This stuff wasn't exactly a secret, and that really puts the scale of this whole thing into perspective. It wasn't just a misreading or a bad take. It was a complete and total fraud, a lie, like the quote says, so audacious it took a dedicated, lifelong campaign of deception to pull off. So who could possibly pull off a lie this big? I mean, every great heist needs a mastermind, right? Well, in this story, it was the very last person you'd expect. The architect of this whole deception was his own sister, Elisabeth Förster-Nietzsche. And here's the kicker. She believed in everything her brother hated. She was a die-hard German nationalist and a vicious anti-Semite. This timeline, it really lays out her motive and her opportunity piece by piece. First, in the 1880s, she and her husband go off to Paraguay to build this pure Aryan colony. It fails, humiliatingly. Her husband even commits suicide. So she comes back to Germany, totally disgraced, a complete failure. But then she discovers something. Her brother, Friedrich, is now famous, but he's also had a complete mental breakdown. He's helpless. He was the perfect vehicle for her to resurrect her own failed ambitions. So with motive and opportunity locked in, Elisabeth gets to work. And this wasn't just about twisting a few of her brother's words. Oh no. She was going to forge an entirely new prophet from scratch. She starts this thing called the Nietzsche Archive, but let's be clear, it was not a scholarly center. It was a propaganda factory. She would literally parade her catatonic brother in front of visitors like some kind of grotesque exhibit, all while she was behind the scenes systematically rewriting his legacy to become a prophecy for the exact ideology of hate he fought against his whole life. And her masterpiece, her magnum opus of forgery, was a book called The Will to Power. She teams up with Nazi-approved academics and gets to work. She takes all of her brother's private notebooks, his unpublished, messy, often contradictory thoughts, and she starts to cut and paste. She stitches them all together completely out of context, distorting them until they perfectly matched her political agenda. And then she releases this literary Frankenstein's monster and presents it to the world as his final, definitive masterpiece.
And the crazy thing? It worked. This forgery became like a sacred text for fascists everywhere. They honestly believed they were reading the pure, unfiltered genius of the master, the ultimate philosophical justification for their entire worldview. But what they were actually reading was Elisabeth's carefully crafted propaganda.
So the heist was a total success. And the final chapter? Well, that would cement the lie into the pages of history, getting the personal stamp of approval from the most powerful man in Europe. When Elisabeth died in 1935, Adolf Hitler himself came to her funeral. Just picture that for a second. The Führer personally paying his respects at the grave of the woman who hijacked her brother's mind and handed his reputation over to the Nazi cause. It's like Nietzsche was buried twice. First his body, of course, but then his philosophy, just entombed under the crushing weight of a lie he would have found absolutely repulsive. Now, thankfully, scholars have long since dug up the truth. The Nazi Nietzsche myth has been completely debunked. The real anti-nationalist philosopher is the one we study today. But this whole story? Wow, it's a chilling reminder of just how easily ideas can be twisted and how controlling a story can become an unbelievably powerful political weapon. You know, when you look back at it all, the battle was never really about what Nietzsche actually wrote. It was about who controlled his story. And that kind of leaves us with a question for our own time, doesn't it? As we're all trying to make sense of the world surrounded by so many powerful stories, it's always worth asking, who's telling this story and why? Thanks for joining me on this explainer.